that is truly what saved our lives. We had probably less than 5 minutes, 7 minutes max maybe, from the time I got that till when we came down and were standing in our basement.
You're hearing from Anna Kelly of Washington, Illinois. Her home was leveled by an EF4 tornado on November 17th. Kelly is talking about a weather alert she received on her phone that morning.
News 3 visited the Kelly family at their new home that was built on the foundation of the previous one. They started the rebuilding process in January, but they finished up in May.
Nearly a year later, the Kellys have a much different outlook on life.
I sat down and spoke with Kelly and her husband, Jeff, about the unusual November day.
It's generally not tornado season, but generally in the, second, third week of November, you're not sitting with your windows open either, so anything can happen. It's just trying to be as prepared as you can, and taking those warnings seriously. I mean, that was the first and the only weather alert I've ever gotten on my phone.
I'm a little more sensitive to storms.
Yeah,
Whereas before I wasn't, I'd sit here and storm. Now I'm a little more aware of what's going on. I'm checking the Weather Channel to make sure it's not real severe. It's just rain or a little thunderstorm. But you're more, you're on edge. And it takes time to get over that. I mean, I've gotten better over the past year, but I'm not completely over it. Probably never will be.
I used to love storms. I used to love thunderstorms and stuff like that. And I'm not even supposed to watch the Weather Channel anymore. It makes me so anxious.
Oh, wow.
Just worrying about what could happen versus what probably will happen is a lot more traumatic for me. We didn't even have we didn't have television on, we didn't have anything on. I was resting and he was actually he had just got home from the store and was cleaning the floors.
Yeah, I was getting ready to clean the house and then I was going to watch the Bears play.
I mean, it was just one of those things that just came out of nowhere.
Joining us now is Nicholas Stewart with a look back on that Sunday morning. Now, Nick, can you tell us what type of tornado did destroy Washington?
Yep, so the tornadoes are based on essentially the damage they produce. We call this the EF scale, so it's EF0 through EF5. And a lot of people believe that it's rated purely on the winds that they produce, but it's actually we rate them by the damage they produce because the radar that we have cannot see like the very lowest area of the tornado. And so Dr. Fujita back in 1971 devised a scale based on the damage that these tornadoes produce to actually be able to rate them. So Washington was considered an EF4, high-end EF4, which is winds near 200 miles per hour. This was actually rated 190 miles per hour. And the threshold for an EF5 is 200 miles per hour. So the Washington tornado was just under the threshold for being that EF5 tornado. And that's mainly because Washington didn't have any major structures be hit. For example, Joplin, back in 2011, the tornado actually took aim on a concrete reinforced steel building. It actually moved off its foundation, the hospital. And so that was able to give the Joplin tornado the EF5 rating. And more, for example, you also had in Oklahoma last year, May of last year, you had these houses like clean off their foundation, so you had nothing left. With Washington, you at least had some portions of houses left. You had like either at least a wall standing or you had a fireplace standing. So that's kind of why Washington was just underneath that EF5 threshold.
So can you tell us, did the Weather Service see any signs of this going to be such a horrific Sunday? Any warning?
Yeah, the National Prediction Center, the National Weather Service and the Storm Prediction Center, they outlined an area upwards of 5 days out regarding talking about the risk for severe weather. So the graphic you have up there right now, that's the day 4 outlook issued several days in advance. And as we go through the days coming up to the event, it was upgraded to a slight risk. 3 days ahead of time. Then 2 days before, they upgraded to a moderate risk, which for November is quite rare. You don't see them very often, especially in our neck of the woods in November. But the day before, or the morning of, I should say, around 8 a.m. they issued a very rare high risk. And the high risk for severe weather, when you see these even in springtime, that's when you really need to start taking these tornado precautions very seriously. So there was very good model agreement on the fact that there were going to be very dangerous storms that day, and unfortunately it did verify.
How did the Weather Service alert the people of Washington?
Okay, so it all started off that morning around, I believe it's 8:40 in the morning. They issued the first tornado watch, which included a very large swath of Illinois. And this was over 2 hours in advance before any storms even really started to fire. So the watch was issued at 8:40 a.m. It's called a particularly dangerous situation, or PDS tornado watch. And those are also rare. So they're starting to see a trend here. A lot of these things are very rare. So you had a PDS tornado watch issued, which called for long track, significant tornadoes that could produce, devastating damage. And then leading up to actually when the storm started to fire, we had the first storms going up. We had our first tornado warning issued at 10:50 in the morning. This was Doppler indicated at the time. The tornado had not touched down yet. It was 9 minutes later that a tornado actually touched down. So before there was even a tornado on the ground, the people had 9 minutes of warning. And that warning at 10:50 warned the residents of Washington, even mentioned Washington, it might approach Washington by about 10:05. At 11 a.m., they issued another warning, mentioning again that Washington could be hit by 11:05. At this time, they still did not know that there's a tornado on the ground, but the radar indication was very, very indicative. You had these very tight velocity couplet, which is basically, you can see on radar the winds. And when you see winds like circular pattern in an area, that's kind of when you know that there's probably going to be a tornado forming. And then just as the tornado was moving into Washington, they issued another warning. They upped the language considerably, and that's what she heard on what she saw on her phone, considerable damage expected. The warning stated, quote, confirmed large and extremely dangerous tornado. This is a particularly dangerous situation. So the warnings were very, very strict and very, very stern in their wording. So they had plenty of warning in advance. So
now with winter on the way, after we've seen quite a amount of tornadoes hit over the past few years, what type of advances have the Weather Service made to alert people?
Well, we're always trying to find ways to improve warning. One thing that the National Weather Service is doing, they're really starting to push towards social media a lot more. So Facebook and Twitter, they're putting all the different alerts through that to try and warn people, trying to reach more people. And then the one that she actually got the text on her phone, it's called the WEAS alert, or Wireless Emergency Alert. And that was fairly new. I believe only 2 or 3 years ago they started organizing this, and so that's another way to reach a very large population. Of course, the broadcast media, the EAS alerts on their television as well, they had those warnings.
All right, well,
thanks, Nick.
Thank you, Nick, for joining us.